Soviet intelligence agencies searched for Antonina Panfilova Makarova for over 30 years. No, she was not a notorious thief or a fervent anti-Soviet activist. She was a textile factory worker whose portrait hung on the honor board, a war veteran, the wife of a veteran, and a caring mother of 2 daughters. But when her relatives, neighbors, and colleagues learned that during World War II, she had been a Nazi executioner with the blood of more than 1,500 Soviet citizens on her hands, they were utterly horrified. In August 1978, she was executed by the sentence of a Soviet court. Tonka the machine gunner became one of only 3 women executed in the USSR after the end of Stalinist repressions. Antonina Makarova Panfilova's biography is deeply convoluted, which helped her live undisguised among Soviet people after the war. Her exact age is unknown, though most sources agree she was born in 1920. She was born into a large family in the village of Malaya Volkovka, Smolensk province, where she also started her secondary education. At school, her name was mistakenly recorded as Makarova, confusing her patronymic and surname, and it was never corrected. Thus, in the Panfilov family, the youngest of 7 children ended up with a different last name. She finished school in Moscow, where her family moved when she was 14. After graduation, Tanya Makarova entered a medical college, intending to become a doctor. Her classmates recalled that she was not particularly diligent in her studies, but was an avid reader of books about heroes of the Civil War. Her idol was the legendary female machine gunner Anka. When the war began, Makarova was among the first to volunteer for the front. She later claimed to have served as a medic, carrying wounded soldiers from the battlefield. However, her former comrades refuted this, stating that Tanya worked as a waitress in the soldiers' canteen. She was only reassigned as a medic shortly before her regiment was encircled, so she never fully experienced the hardships of frontline medical service. Antonina's time at the front lasted only 3 months. In October 1941, her regiment was trapped in the Vyazma pocket and Makarova was captured, but she was lucky. One of the prisoners, soldier Nikolai Fechuk, proposed an escape and the risky attempt succeeded. After evading pursuit, Tanya and Nikolai wandered through the forests for nearly 2 months, gradually moving toward Fechuk's home village. Antonina later claimed that her companion turned out to be a vile scoundrel who raped her. However, it is likely that she simply reciprocated his advances to ensure he wouldn't abandon her. Whatever the case, when the fugitives arrived in the village of Krasny Kolodets in the Lakat district, Fechuk's hometown, they had to part ways. Antonina likely had hopes for him, but in Krasny Kolodets, he already had a wife and 2 children and no longer needed his traveling companion. Left alone, Makarova wandered the area until some local women took pity on her, offering her shelter and food. But the newcomer proved ungrateful. She began seducing local men and stealing. After a scandal, Antonina was thrown out of the village and once again found herself on the brink of survival. At that moment, she had 2 choices: join the Soviet partisans and endure the hardships of life in the forest, or betray her homeland and turn to the occupiers. Makarova chose the latter, having heard that the Germans treated those who voluntarily joined them with favor, providing food, housing, and money. In January 1942, a young woman entered the German-occupied settlement of Lakat, about 100 kilometers south of Bryansk, and confidently made her way to the commandant's office. At that time, Lakat was not just a settlement, but the capital of the so-called Lakat Republic. This was a puppet collaborationist entity that had sworn allegiance to the Nazis. It was led by Bronislav Kaminsky, a former Bolshevik who had been repressed in 1935 for criticizing the party line and for brewing moonshine. After serving his sentence, Kaminsky was exiled to Lakat, and when the Germans occupied the area, he eagerly joined their ranks. People like Antonina without a home, acquaintances, or strong beliefs were exactly what Kaminsky needed. He immediately offered Makarova a well-paid job at the commandant's office. Her duties included executing civilians and prisoners of war with a machine gun. She was placed under the command of the local police chief and received a salary of 30 Reichsmarks. Before her first execution, Tonka the machine gunner, as she came to be known, had to be given vodka to carry out the task. The executions took place on the outskirts of Urva, where Soviet prisoners of war, partisans, the elderly, women, and children were lined up. Tonka was given a machine gun and she fired at them, finishing off any survivors with a pistol. Usually she had to work once a day, executing 20-30 people, but sometimes she was called in for a second round. Makarova quickly grew accustomed to her role as executioner and soon no longer needed alcohol to do her job. Tonka also discovered a bonus to her salary. Before and after executions, she would rob her victims, stripping them of clothing, jewelry, and money. She became well integrated among the Nazis, spending her days executing prisoners and her nights dancing with German soldiers, even engaging in intimate relations with them for rewards. Ironically, it was Makarova's promiscuity that saved her from immediate retribution. In the summer of 1943, she contracted syphilis and was sent deep into German-controlled territory for treatment. Thus, when Soviet troops liberated Lokot and hanged the collaborators and murderers in the town square, Antonina Makarova was nowhere to be found. She was far away in Poland with her latest lover, a German corporal she had met while being treated. However, her attempt to build a new life with him failed. Her fiancé was killed and she ended up in a concentration camp. After Soviet troops liberated the prisoners, the executioner girl produced a stolen military ID and assumed a false identity. Not only did she escape justice, but she even briefly served in the Red Army, which fully legitimized her as a Soviet citizen. Her complete transformation into an ordinary Soviet woman was sealed when she married a war hero, Sergeant Viktor Ginsburg. Soon, the couple had a daughter. Ginsburg, a Jew who had lost most of his family during the war, had no idea that he was sharing a bed with a monster. Antonina tried to be a good wife and caring mother. After the war, the young family first lived in Kaliningrad and later moved to Viktor's hometown, Lepel, Belarus. There, the Ginsburgs had a second daughter. Antonina Ginsburg worked at a sewing factory and, as a recognized war veteran, received medals on victory anniversaries. Her colleagues and neighbors had no complaints about her. Some people noticed that Ginsburg seemed somewhat reserved and cautious. However, Tonka had enough cynicism to stand before schoolchildren on September 1st and May 9th, telling fabricated stories about the hardships of the front lines. The elderly woman, adorned with medals, was respected in Lepel and was even a member of the Veterans Council. Later, under investigation, Tonka the machine gunner admitted that for the first 10 years after the war, she would flinch at every knock on the door. But over time, she became convinced that no one was looking for her and that her past had been forgotten. She was wrong. Tonka the machine gunner was being hunted across the entire Soviet Union and even in Poland, where she had last been seen with her Nazi lover. The years had changed Antonina significantly, making it difficult to recognize her. But tracking down war criminals was never easy, and in the case of Antonina Makarova, the KGB had almost no leads. By the 1970s, there were hardly any living witnesses to Tonka's crimes. Archival searches quickly led to dead ends due to the confusion of surnames and dates that had followed the executioner woman throughout her life. Antonina Ginsburg was discovered purely by chance in 1976. Her older brother, Panfilov, an officer in the Soviet army, was filling out paperwork for an overseas trip when he mentioned that he had a sister named Antonina Ginsburg, whose maiden name was not Panfilova, but Makarova. This led the authorities to put her under surveillance. They questioned her a couple of times under the pretense of clarifying information for a potential state award. However, Ginsburg could not name the units she had served in, nor the names of her commanders. She only kept repeating that she had forgotten everything over the past 30 years. Tonka the machine gunner was finally identified when she was shown to former residents of Lokot who had been brought to Lepel specifically for this purpose. Despite the passage of time, they confidently recognized her as the murderer. She was arrested discreetly, summoned to her supervisor's office during work hours. When the handcuffs snapped shut on Antonina Ginsburg's wrists, she showed no surprise at all. The investigation into Tonka, the machine gunner's crimes, lasted nearly 2 years. During this time, she was officially proven to have murdered 168 people, although her actual number of victims exceeded 1,500. In 1978, the court sentenced Antonina Ginsburg to the highest penalty, execution. The sentence was carried out in August 1979. When her husband Victor learned the truth about the woman he had lived with for 30 years, his hair turned gray in a matter of days. He took their daughters and disappeared from Lepel. His exact whereabouts remain unknown. Some say that Tonka's family emigrated to Israel and changed their surname, but forgetting such a wife and mother would hardly be possible. The history of the Soviet Union records only 3 official cases where women were sentenced to death. The first was Antonina Ginsburg, known as Tonka the machine gunner. During World War II, she collaborated with the Nazis and executed 1,500 partisans and their allies. Tonka the machine gunner was executed on August 11, 1979, in a Bryansk prison. But who was the second woman to be executed in the USSR? Meet Berta Naumovna Borodkina. Unlike Antonina, Berta Borodkina was neither a murderer nor a repeat offender. On the contrary, she had connections in the Soviet government and was considered the Queen of Gelendzhik. Berta Borodkina, also known as Iron Bella, was the ruler of glasses and ladles in the resort town of Gelendzhik. High-ranking Soviet officials dined at her restaurants, enjoying fine food, alcohol, and entertainment. Ironically, it was her ties to the powerful that ultimately led to her downfall. Berta was born in Biela Tserkva, Ukraine in 1927 or 1923, according to some sources. She dropped out of school in her senior years and moved to Odessa. For a time, she lived with a Romanian deserter, and after World War II, she worked as a waitress. By 1951, she had reappeared in Gelendzhik under a new name, Bella Koral. Her passport also stated she was 5 years younger than her actual age. She began working as a barmaid in one of the local establishments. In Gelendzhik, she met and soon married a Navy officer of the 3rd rank. Thus, Bella Koral became Bella Borodkina. As Anton Lopatin, an assistant prosecutor of the Krasnodar region, recounted, her husband was many years older than Bella. Moreover, she stole vodka from the cafe where she worked and would literally get her husband drunk in the evenings. In 1954, he passed away, unable to withstand such a lifestyle. Bella became the owner of a large house near the sea and inherited the money her husband had managed to accumulate. Borodkina took her education seriously. She had no intention of remaining a cafeteria worker for long. First, she obtained a secondary education and later a higher one. Step by step, she climbed the ranks from a simple cafeteria worker to a restaurant manager. On average, Bella received a promotion every few years. Of course, these promotions didn't come without reason. The first secretary of the Krasnodar Regional Committee of the Communist Party, Sergei Medjinov, also known as the Master of Cuban, was considered one of her patrons in the late 1960s and early 1970s. Thanks to his influence, in 1974, she became the head of the restaurant and dining trust in the resort town. Now, Bella controlled the operation of all public catering establishments in Gelendzhik. Additionally, her career advancement was supported by Nikolai Pogodin, who was then the first secretary of the Gelendzhik City Committee of the Communist Party, as well as the secretary of the Central Committee of the Communist Party, Fyodor Kulikov, along with numerous party and government officials. As she accumulated new influential connections within various socio-political structures, she became well-versed in the intricate web of corruption in Gelendzhik. By accepting bribes and valuable gifts, she secured the ability to carry out financial schemes in her industry without obstruction. Serving high-ranking vacationers with delicacies and scarce alcohol, while also providing them with female companionship, Borodkina, nicknamed Iron Bella by the people, deceived ordinary resort-goers who had saved money for years to vacation on the Black Sea. Her main source of income was swindling vacationers, who, during the era of the Iron Curtain, had no foreign alternatives and flocked en masse to the resorts of the Krasnodar region. Fraud thrived in all the catering establishments under her control. With Bella's approval, a significant portion of the meat in cutlets was replaced with bread, and the saved meat was resold to numerous kebab vendors. To achieve a richer color in coffee and tea, burnt sugar was added, while genuine ingredients were sent to the black market. A major boost to Borodkina's illicit wealth came from high-quality, strong alcoholic beverages, which were initially diluted slightly with cheap vodka, and when a customer became sufficiently intoxicated, were replaced entirely with surrogate alcohol. In general, heavy drinkers were the favorite clientele of public eateries, as they could be deceived not only in the quality of alcohol, but also by having additional, unordered dishes added to their bills. The restaurant staff treated guests from the Arctic regions with particular warmth, those who, having reached the Black Sea, spent their hard-earned money recklessly without even checking what they were being charged for. Every day, all of Borodkina's subordinate establishments were required to pay her a tribute to avoid her interference in their illegal dealings. She kept part of the profits for herself and passed the rest on to her influential patrons in higher authorities. Fearless in the face of inspections by the Economic Crime Department, BKHSS, Bella was extremely hostile toward private landlords who rented out accommodations with meals. Unwilling to share her profits with them, she often resorted to provocations. For instance, she would place her own people in such guest houses, who would then stage scandals over poor service and bad food. Rumors about unreliable kitchens would quickly spread across the resort, and her dining establishments would experience a new influx of customers. Having once organized a banquet for Leonid Brezhnev himself, Bella eventually fell into the hands of law enforcement under rather unusual circumstances. One of the clients of her restaurant trust went to the police with a statement claiming that he had inadvertently witnessed special guests being shown pornographic films in a secluded corner of the establishment. As a result of an operational inspection, the management was caught red-handed and arrested on charges of distributing pornography. During the investigation, the restaurant staff admitted that they had acted with the permission of their superiors, with whom they shared profits not only from these secret screenings, but also from financial embezzlement. This gave the Department for Combating the Misappropriation of Socialist Property an official reason to arrest the esteemed worker of trade and public catering of the Bella Borodkina. At the time of her arrest, Iron Bella remained very calm and told the investigators, "Guys, what are you talking about? Tomorrow I expect to be released with an apology." She had no idea that all the corruption in Jelenjik's public catering sector would be blamed solely on her. Within a month of her arrest, Iron Bella had turned into an old woman. She cried and complained about torture. She told her sister that her teeth were pulled out with pliers and that she was beaten every evening. Later, this deeply unfortunate woman was sentenced to execution. It is said that after learning her fate, she lost her mind, and at night, eerie howls could be heard from her cell. Her only daughter begged the authorities for clemency, but her pleas were in vain. The case materials on Borodkina amounted to 20 volumes. They documented not only her fraudulent schemes for illegal enrichment, but also the valuables discovered during the search. Precious jewelry, scarce goods, expensive carpets, paintings, crystal tableware, antiques, and fur products, hidden under floorboards, inside heating pipes, behind brickwork, under wallpaper, in jars of pickles, and in other secret stashes. Investigators found a staggering sum of 561,843 rubles and 89 kopecks. In 1983, 57-year-old Borodkina was executed in the Novocherkassk prison, and her relatives were not even allowed to retrieve her remains. In reality, Bella Borodkina became a sacrificial victim of a political struggle between the waning General Secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, Leonid Brezhnev, who favored Sergei Medinov, and KGB chairman Yuri Andropov, who supported Mikhail Gorbachev. Andropov was convinced that Medinov's arrest was only a matter of time. However, Brezhnev, though gravely ill, could not deny his protege one last favor. Medinov was never brought to trial. He was demoted, recalled to Moscow, and allowed to live out his years in peace. However, he was removed from the Central Committee and expelled from the party. The once all-powerful ruler of the Krasnodar region became just an ordinary Soviet pensioner and died in 1999, lonely and deeply unhappy. In his last interview, he never even mentioned the execution of Bella Borodkina in 1983. During the investigation of the Sochi Krasnodar case, more than 5,000 Soviet officials were dismissed from their positions, and 1,500 of them received actual prison sentences. The head of the city's Communist Party, Nikolai Pogodin, disappeared without a trace after the purges began, and yet it was only Bella Borodkina who paid the ultimate price with her life. In 1987, the entire Soviet Union was shaken by horrific news. In Kiev, an entire family of serial killers was brought to trial. For many years, they had ruthlessly poisoned people with the deadly toxin thallium. On the defendants' bench were Maria and Anton Maslenko and their daughters, Tamara Ivanutina and Nina Matsabora. The highest number of victims was attributed to 45-year-old Ivanutina. She poisoned 20 people, including young children. Tamara Antonovna Ivanutina became the last woman in the USSR to be sentenced to death and was executed in late 1987. The motives of the serial killer Ivanutina were revenge and greed. Moreover, Tamara did not want to breed poverty through the children of others. Psychiatrists found Ivanutina to be fully sane, but highlighted three main traits of her personality: extremely high self-esteem, hypersensitivity, and vengefulness. These characteristics are typical of sociopaths, paranoids, and narcissists. Tamara Antonovna was born into a large family in Kiev, where she was the fourth of 6 children. It must be said that this was a rather strange family, all of whom were obsessed with wealth and luxury. Her father didn't hesitate to poison anyone he didn't like, and her mother adhered to the philosophy that one should not complain, but instead befriend everyone, feed everyone, but secretly add poison to the food of the unpleasant ones. The Maslenkos didn't hesitate to fatally poison a neighbor who played the TV too loudly, disturbing their sleep. They even poisoned a relative who commented that their floors were dirty. The Maslenkos would add rat poison to pilaf and pancakes they made for guests, as well as stuff oranges and gingerbread with poison. This was their form of revenge for perceived insults. When Tamara grew up, she married a truck driver, one of the most prestigious professions in the Soviet Union at the time, with a good salary. A non-drinking, hard-working husband with a decent income. What more could a Soviet woman want? But Tamara was not content with that. She needed money and an apartment right away. So she began to poison her husband, slowly increasing the dose. Once while on a trip, the man began to feel unwell. He complained to his partner about a severe headache, nausea, and numbness in his limbs. His hair also started falling out. Every day, Tamara's husband felt worse and worse. Soon after returning from his trip, he died from a heart attack. Tamara didn't mourn for long and soon remarried, taking the surname of her new husband, Oleg Ivanutin. Upon seeing the Ivanutin family's plot and house, Tamara made a decision. The old folks were to be disposed of, the land would become a pig farm, the pigs would be slaughtered for meat and lard, and they would become rich. One day, Tamara and her mother-in-law prepared lunch and set the table. They sat down and ate, but by evening, the elderly Ivanutin began to feel very unwell. The next morning, his mother called Oleg, saying that his father was feeling much worse, that his legs were hurting, and his heart ached. Oleg advised his mother to call an ambulance. The doctors at the hospital examined the old man and said his polyarthritis had flared up, prescribed some medication, and sent him home. Tamara became very concerned about her father-in-law's health and told her husband that they needed to visit his parents to help in some way. Tamara even applied a heating pad to his feet and fed him soup with a spoon. Oleg praised her as the most caring daughter-in-law in the world. Meanwhile, she was adding another dose of poison to her father-in-law's soup. That very night, the old man died. But the most interesting part came next. At her husband's funeral, the widow started feeling unwell, her heart acting up. Oleg asked Tamara to bring some medicine from home. She returned with a shot of Valacordin and a glass of water. After taking the medicine, his mother staggered, white foam appeared on her lips, and she immediately vomited. Panic broke out among those present. The widow screamed that she had been poisoned. A woman swore that she had seen Tamara drop some liquid from a vial into the medicine, which she had taken from her coat pocket. The men began demanding the police be called, and someone suggested that the contents of the glass be sent for examination. And then Tamara threw both the glass with medicine and the cup of water onto the floor. Oleg Ivanutin shielded his wife from the angry crowd and started calming his mother down. Soon, Oleg's mother began experiencing the same symptoms as his late father. Her arms and legs hurt, her feet were numb, and she couldn't move her tongue, barely speaking. By evening, she was taken to the hospital by ambulance, and 2 days later, she passed away. The road to Tamara's personal pig farm was now open, but where to get feed? The answer was simple: at school. Tamara Ivanutina got a job as a dishwasher at school number 16 in the Minsk district of Kiev. In March 1987, 3 sixth graders and 11 school staff members were brought to the hospital by ambulance, diagnosed with the flu. They all had the same symptoms: weakness, nausea, leg pain, and hair loss. Despite intensive treatment, 2 children and 2 adults died almost immediately, and the rest were in the ICU. For that time, 4 consecutive deaths was a real emergency, and the prosecutor's office took over the case. Doctors called for an emergency meeting and suggested that an unknown form of the flu might have caused the deaths. Thus, the standard treatment was ineffective. Another theory was voiced: people were poisoned with a strong toxic substance through food or water. Initially, this theory was not considered, but after the authorities questioned the survivors, it turned out that they all had eaten leftovers from lunch at the school cafeteria: chicken soup and chicken liver. Interestingly, those who had lunch on time did not suffer. The first victim of Tamara's actions was school nurse Kukarenko, who had scolded Ivanutina for not following hygiene rules. It should be noted that Tamara wasn't shy about arguing with both children and teachers. She constantly hovered around the stove, peeking into the pots. However, due to her meager salary, it was difficult to find another dishwasher, so Ivanutina was kept on the job. When Kukarenko was hospitalized, she complained of numbness and coldness in her legs. Doctors diagnosed her with heart failure. Just recently, the woman had appeared healthy, active, and cheerful. 6 months earlier, 2 schoolchildren and 2 teachers had been hospitalized with the same symptoms. One of them told the investigators that, strangely, he had lost his hair very quickly. These facts suggested that the illnesses were not a coincidence, and the decision was made to exhume Kukarenko's remains. That's when the presence of thallium in her tissues was discovered. Of course, it never occurred to anyone that someone might have deliberately used a dangerous poison to poison people. A request to the sanitary and epidemiological station for pest control measures in the school kitchen was met with a negative response. Specialists checked all the school rooms, products, pots, containers for cereals, and even the remaining buckwheat. There were no results. However, investigators noticed the strange behavior of the dishwasher Ivanutina. She actively obstructed the inspection of her locker. The next step was to check the personal files of the cafeteria workers. That's when it was discovered that Ivanutina's employment record book was fake, as she had a criminal record for speculation, meaning she was not allowed to work in children's institutions. This led to a deeper investigation into her life. That's when the deaths of her first husband and her second parents came to light. All of them had complained of nausea and numbness in their limbs. Oleg Ivanutin himself had long been ill, with general weakness, joint pain, and hair loss. But the doctors couldn't diagnose him. Tamara became the #1 suspect. During a search of Ivanutina's house, the key evidence was found literally at the last moment. After inspecting everything that could be examined, investigator Kalichikova suddenly approached a nightstand by the window and asked to open the drawer. Ivanutina, who had been watching the proceedings with disdain, hesitantly stepped toward the nightstand. "Are you going to inspect it?" "Yes, we are inspecting it. Open it or give me the key. I'll open it myself." Ivanutina threw the keys on the floor and almost hissed, "You open it." Kalichikova inspected the sewing machine and found a bottle hidden underneath it, supposedly containing oil for lubricating the parts. The bottle and its contents were seized and sent for analysis. The laboratory test showed that the bottle contained a solution of thallium. This is a water-based solution of thallium, which is used in geology to separate minerals by density. Therefore, the first checks were carried out in all organizations of the Ministry of Geology of Ukraine. It didn't take long to find the supplier. One of the laboratory assistants from a geological exploration expedition regularly supplied the Maslenko family with thallium, allegedly for rat poisoning. Over time, they had received around 500 mg of poison. Tamara's sister Nina Matsibora also did not lag behind. She sent her lawful husband to the grave. Nina had married a man much older than herself. After registering her young wife at his apartment, the elderly husband signed his own death sentence. A week after the wedding, he was hospitalized with complaints of weakness and leg pain. His death was attributed to old age. During searches at Tamara's parents' house, Maria and Anton Maslenko, no poison was found, but the perpetrators revealed themselves. When Ivanutina was already in custody, her mother, Maria Maslenko, baked pancakes and went to offer them to a neighbor. The neighbor had a large pension due to disability, which caused envy from Maslenko. However, the neighbor didn't eat the pancakes because she had heard that the old woman's daughter was suspected of poisoning. She threw one pancake to her cat, and by evening the poor animal was convulsing and died 3 hours later. The neighbor reported this to the police, and the Maslenko couple was arrested. Just like Tamara, they described in detail and with relish whom they had poisoned, when, how, and why. Initially, Tamara Ivanutina confessed to her crimes and gave a detailed account. It turned out that she had poisoned 2 sixth graders simply because they had refused to arrange the tables and chairs. "I decided to punish them," Tamara said. Ivanutina also revealed that she had first tested the effects of the poison on the neighbors' chickens and cats, experimenting with the dosage, knowing which dose would make a person mildly sick and which would certainly kill. She was not at all concerned about the suffering her victims endured as they died. "In such matters there can be no mistakes," Ivanutina self-righteously claimed. However, later Ivanutina stated that she had confessed under pressure from the investigation and refused to give further testimony. But the investigation had already pieced together the full picture of the crime. So in the fall of 1986, Ivanutina poisoned the schoolchildren to death. The woman had interfered with the theft of food from the tables. Later, Tamara poisoned 2 first and 5th grade students who dared to ask her for the leftover cutlets from lunch. Fortunately, the children survived, but such poisoning leaves lasting effects on the body. After the death of Nurse Kukarenko, the head of the cafeteria, Nogo, sensed something was wrong and began locking the pantry at night to prevent Ivanutina from having access to the food. Then the enraged psychopath openly declared that the leg would follow Kukarenko. The poisoner, using a syringe, filled an orange with thallium solution and offered it to the head of the cafeteria, but fortunately he didn't eat it. On that ill-fated March day when the children were poisoned, the liver with thallium was also meant for the cafeteria manager. It just happened that some school employees were late for lunch due to a trade union meeting. As witnesses later recounted, Ivanutina watched with a satisfied smile as innocent people consumed the poisoned dishes. In total, the family was responsible for 40 proven poisonings, 13 of which were fatal. Surprisingly, the entire family was deemed sane after forensic psychiatric evaluation. Tamara Ivanutina was the most successful in terms of poisonings, with 20 incidents, 9 of which ended in death. The trial of the serial killers lasted several months. Tamara's husband, Oleg Ivanutin, testified that each time, Tamara brought more and more waste from the school, while being pleased that the children were not eating well. Teachers were targeted because they forced the kids to finish their portions. This was not in the interest of the dishwasher, Tamara, so she decided to poison the most persistent teachers. Moreover, poisonings in the school cafeteria, in her opinion, were meant to create distrust in the school food, thus increasing the amount of waste for her pigs. Tamara Ivanutina was sentenced to the death penalty with confiscation of property. Her father, mother, and sister were sentenced to 13, 10, and 15 years of imprisonment, respectively, with an obligation to compensate the victims for medical expenses. When Tamara was given the chance to speak, she refused to admit her guilt and apologized to the families of her victims. "I wasn't raised that way," she arrogantly stated. Tamara Ivanutina was executed by shooting at the end of 1987 in the Lukyanivska prison in Kyiv. She became the third and last female criminal officially sentenced to death in the USSR. The elderly murderers died in prison, and her sister, Nina Matsibora, who had served part of her sentence, was released into post-Soviet Ukraine. Unfortunately, her further fate remains unknown. That's all from me. If you found the video interesting, please like it and don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.